What if I told you that Joe Rogan, the man who built his empire on real talk and no bias, just got caught looking real suspicious after Candace Owens dropped what she's calling undeniable proof against Charlie Kirk? What if the so-called truth warriors of the right-wing podcast world are actually eating each other alive behind the scenes? Because according to leaked footage, anonymous producers, and one mysteriously deleted tweet, Candace didn't just expose Charlie, she might have exposed Joe too. And now the internet's asking, is Joe Rogan really neutral? Or has he been covering for his friends this whole time? So here's where things get messy, because this whole Joe Rogan, Candace Owens, and Charlie Kirk saga didn't just happen overnight. This was brewing quietly in the backrooms of the conservative media universe, long before the internet ever caught a whiff. The story starts with Candace Owens sitting across from Joe Rogan in what was supposed to be a casual podcast interview. You know, the usual some talk about politics, culture, and cancel culture. But halfway through, Candace dropped something so sharp, so loaded, that even Rogan's legendary poker face started to twitch. She said, and I quote, "Some of these people pretending to fight for free speech are just building empires off manipulation." That one sentence froze the studio. The crew stopped moving. Joe's eyebrow went up, and the internet hasn't come down since. Because everyone knew exactly who she was talking about, Charlie Kirk, the self-proclaimed youth leader of conservative America. The guy with a podcast for patriots and a private jet for business trips. Now, for months, rumors have been swirling about Charlie's secret donors, shadow funding, and motivational conferences that somehow end with seven-figure payouts. But what nobody expected was Candace Owens being the one to finally crack that open. Not just because she's outspoken, but because Charlie used to be her ally. They built their brands side by side, attending the same Turning Point events, smiling through the same sound bites about freedom. But behind those smiles? Sources say it was chaos. An insider, allegedly a former TPUSA staffer, claimed. Candace was tired of watching Charlie preach integrity on stage and cut side deals off camera, according to leaked emails that surfaced on Reddit for less than an hour before being mysteriously deleted. Charlie Kirk was allegedly funneling donor money into consulting fees that led straight back to shell companies tied to his personal circle. And here's where Joe Rogan gets dragged in. Because according to people close to the situation, Rogan knew. He had been warned about Kirk's funding methods months ago, but allegedly decided not to touch it on air because, quote, Charlie's people buy space, let that sink in. The man who built an empire on being unfiltered might have stayed quiet because the receipts came from someone paying his bills. That's where Candace's proof comes in. She allegedly showed Rogan an email chain, yes, a real one between one of Charlie's assistants and Rogan's own production manager. The subject line? Sponsorship coordination. Episode placement. In that email, there were line items showing large transfers marked as strategic partnership placements. Translation? Charlie Kirk was allegedly paying to appear or at least stay uncriticized on certain platforms. Candace didn't reveal all the details on air, but insiders say Rogan's team immediately tried to cut that segment. And when Candace refused to back down, Joe shifted topics faster than a cat on a hot stove. But the internet wasn't blind. Clips of that awkward exchange hit TikTok before the full episode was even posted. Viewers pointed out Rogan's nervous body language, the throat clearing, the fake laugh, the sip of water that lasted way too long. And within hours, hashtags like #RoganExposed and #CandaceGotReceipts were trending. Meanwhile, Charlie Kirk stayed silent. No tweets, no statements, no live reactions. Which, let's be honest, for Charlie is a red flag in itself. Because this is the same man who posts daily about media accountability and standing in truth, yet when the fire came to his doorstep, he ghosted harder than an intern after payday. But it didn't stop there. Candace went further. She went live on her own channel that same night, doubling down with the words, "If the men who scream the loudest about honesty can't handle a few receipts, then maybe they've been screaming to cover something else." That's when everything went nuclear. Conservative fans started splitting Team Joe, Team Candace, Team Charlie. Memes, conspiracies, and podcast reaction videos flooded YouTube. Rogan's subreddit turned into a war zone of speculation. And somewhere in the middle of all that digital smoke, a rumor started to circulate that Joe Rogan's producer had allegedly received a warning call from one of Charlie's donors hours after the interview. Nobody knows exactly what was said on that call, but the next morning, parts of the episode were conveniently edited out. And guess which part disappeared first? The 3-minute segment where Candace mentioned strategic payments, viewers compared timestamps, reuploads, and audio leaks and realized those minutes were scrubbed clean. Now, the question everyone's asking, was Rogan protecting Charlie or protecting himself? Because if those payments existed and if his team accepted them, then we're not talking about a scandal anymore. We're talking about collusion, and when Candace posted a cryptic tweet that night saying, "Never trust a man who calls himself curious but hides from questions," it was game over. The internet had officially turned on Joe Rogan the very next day. One anonymous account claiming to work with Spotify dropped a bombshell alleging that executives had discussed content risk over the Owens interview. According to the leak, internal emails referred to the episode as potentially inflammatory and advised temporary moderation. Translation: they were scared. Scared of losing sponsors, scared of political fallout, and maybe scared of what else might come out if Candace kept digging. And that's where the real story begins, because if there's one thing Candace Owens doesn't do, it's back down from a public fight. Especially when she knows she's holding the receipts. The next 48 hours after that podcast episode were pure digital anarchy. Reddit threads lit up like wildfire. Twitter, or X, whatever we're calling it now, was a battlefield. Half the comments were calling Candace Owens a hero. The other half accused her of orchestrating a takedown for clout. But behind the chaos, there were whispers deep. Quiet ones about something much bigger than just a podcast argument. An alleged former intern from Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA dropped a cryptic message in a conservative group chat. If Candace goes public with everything she's got, 3 networks will collapse in a week. That line alone had YouTube commentators foaming at the mouth. What did she mean by everything she's got? Because if what's circulating in those anonymous leaks is even halfway true, it paints a picture of a political influencer web so tangled even Joe Rogan couldn't joke his way out of it, according to one supposed leak. Candace had access to donor receipts proving Charlie Kirk used charity funds to bankroll private events that never existed. Those educational seminars he bragged about? Apparently, they were luxury retreats at desert villas in Arizona complete with private chefs, champagne fountains, and yes, a private jet allegedly labeled as a mobile awareness platform. When anonymous insider told the Independent Patriot blog, they called it outreach. But it looked more like outreach to the minibar. And where does Joe Rogan come in? Right in the middle. Because while Rogan wasn't part of those luxury trips, his name allegedly appeared on a guest consideration list for one of them. According to the source, a 2022 email from Kirk's assistant mentioned Rogan under strategic influencer relations, which sounds innocent, until you realize those relations were paired with 6-figure consulting donations. Candace Owens reportedly caught wind of that connection during her own negotiations with one of Kirk's sponsors. That's why, sources claim, she walked into Rogan's studio ready to set the stage not just for a conversation, but for an exposure. It wasn't impulsive, it was surgical, and oh, Joe felt it. Every second of that awkward silence during the interview looked heavier in hindsight. Clips slowed down to half speed showed Rogan glancing toward his producer's booth right after. Candace said the word manipulation. Fans claimed you could see the panic in his eyes, but Candace didn't just drop hints, she followed up with proof 3 days after the episode aired. She released a receipts video on her YouTube channel titled Charlie Kirk Transparency, and the silence that speaks volumes. Within minutes, it hit 500,000 views. In the video, she displayed blurred-out financial statements allegedly linking Kirk's organization to off-the-books payments labeled media expansion. She claimed one of those payments was traced to a top-tier podcast network. She never said Joe Rogan's name, but she didn't have to. The comment section did it for her. One top comment read, "If the shoe fits, smoke it on air, Joe." Another said, "Candace just torched the Rogan-Kirk empire and poured gasoline on it." Within hours, Rogan's management reportedly contacted YouTube to issue a copyright claim on clips from that episode. Convenient? Right. Suddenly, fan uploads with the suspicious clips started disappearing. Entire reaction videos vanished. But nothing disappears completely on the internet. Someone always saves the receipts. A small TikTok account posted the original footage again, except this time, they slowed it down, added subtitles, and circled every nervous twitch Rogan made. The video hit for million views overnight. That's when mainstream outlets started sniffing around. Rolling Stone dropped an article the next morning titled, "Candace Owens vs. Joe Rogan, the Conservative. Civil war no one saw coming." It detailed how their rivalry could fracture the entire right-wing podcast ecosystem. Sponsors started pulling back. A major energy drink brand, one that sponsored both Rogan and Kirk, suddenly suspended all influencer contracts, citing internal review. Meanwhile, Charlie Kirk finally broke his silence, but not with an apology. Oh no, he went live from an undisclosed location, read hotel room, to say the words, "I will not be bullied by a jealous woman and a comedian who's lost touch with reality." The irony of Charlie calling anyone out for reality was rich enough to fill a whole season of satire. But Candace didn't even flinch. She fired back on X with a 13-word tweet that broke the internet. "You can't hide behind God, guns, and donors forever. Charlie, truth comes." That tweet hit 40 million views in 2 hours. And just when people thought this was about to cool down, another leak surfaced. A journalist from Insider Politics Daily released screenshots allegedly showing that a well-known PR firm, rumored to represent both Rogan's show and Turning Point USA, had sent out internal crisis memos. The memos warned of brand contamination and cross-audience risk. Translation, they were scared that the audiences for Rogan and Kirk were about to turn on both of them. Spotify was reportedly furious. An unnamed Spotify executive told one outlet, "We don't censor creators, but we also don't host scandals we didn't sign up for." And by that point, the scandal was bleeding into politics, religion, and even comedy circles. Everyone wanted to know, did Joe Rogan knowingly protect Charlie Kirk's corruption? Or was he just another pawn in a high-stakes PR game that got to real? Either way, the damage was done. The internet was already rewriting Rogan's image from truth teller to gatekeeper. The memes were brutal. One viral post showed Rogan photoshopped as a puppet with Kirk pulling the strings. Another joked, "Joe Rogan Experience, brought to you by Turning Point USA and your tax dollars." But behind the memes and the chaos, the tension was real. Candace had forced open a crack in the conservative media empire, and whatever was hiding behind it was about to spill out. By the third week, the scandal had officially gone nuclear. What started as a few awkward minutes on a podcast had turned into a full-blown cultural earthquake. Candace Owens wasn't just trending, she was leading a movement. Every news outlet, from independent YouTube channels to late-night talk shows, was dissecting every word she said. And Joe Rogan? The man who once mocked mainstream media for dodging the truth was suddenly dodging cameras, canceling appearances, and, according to insiders, taking an extended break to reassess creative direction. Translation, the walls were closing in, but here's where things went from bad to catastrophic. A whistleblower, allegedly a mid-level employee from one of Rogan's production partners, leaked a 37-page internal memo. That memo included correspondence between Rogan's producers and a PR firm reportedly tied to Charlie Kirk's team. The subject line? Narrative Alignment Plan. The memo outlined ways to neutralize backlash and pivot narrative toward mutual unity using humor-based deflection and selective guest scheduling. Basically, it was a PR playbook for damage control, proof that the free speech warriors were quietly coordinating behind the scenes to keep their images clean. And when that document hit the internet, all hell broke loose. Journalists started connecting dots between Rogan's advertisers, Kirk's donors, and media companies with matching shareholders. Suddenly, it wasn't just about podcasts, it was about influence, money, and manipulation. Candace Owens took to X again with a voice note that sounded like a mix of exhaustion and vindication. They thought they could gaslight the world and get away with it, she said. But truth doesn't need a PR team. It just needs courage. Courage. The reaction? Explosive. Overnight, #TruthNeeds Noper became a rallying cry. Memes, TikToks, and even protest merch popped up online. Conservative and liberal influencers alike were calling for transparency in podcasting. And in a poetic twist of irony, Joe Rogan, who made his name questioning authority, was now being called the establishment himself. Meanwhile, Charlie Kirk's empire was starting to crumble. Reports surfaced that several major donors had temporarily suspended contributions pending internal review. One whistleblower claimed the organization's legal team was in panic mode, trying to audit years of misallocated funds. The optics were disastrous. Kirk, who once preached fiscal discipline and moral leadership, was now allegedly knee-deep in a financial scandal that could make Enron blush and Candace Owens. She smelled blood. During a live stream viewed by over 2 million people, she declared, "If Joe Rogan won't hold Charlie Kirk accountable, then I will. And if they both fall in the process, consider it a public service." The internet went wild. Clips of that quote were everywhere. Late-night hosts were joking that Candace had gone full Batman, but behind the jokes, everyone knew something bigger was at play. Because within 48 hours of that statement, someone leaked audio, the clip, allegedly from a private conversation between Rogan and his producer, captured Joe saying, "If this blows up, we could lose everything." Candace doesn't play fair. Whether the recording was real or not didn't matter, people believed it. And that belief spread faster than any fact check ever could. By that weekend, sponsors were dropping like flies. An energy drink brand, a crypto platform, and even a health supplement line all issued the same generic statement: "We are reevaluating partnerships in light of recent allegations." Spotify's stock dipped for % in a single day, and Joe? He tried to push back. On a surprise live stream, he told viewers, "I don't censor anyone. I don't take orders from donors. I've always been about open dialogue." But the problem was no one was buying it. The comments section was brutal. Thousands of fans spam phrases like "open dialogue unless it costs you money" and "bought and paid for podcast." Even comedians his own community started roasting him. A viral stand-up clip showed one comic joking, "Joe Rogan says he's unbiased, but his mic probably has a turning point watermark." Meanwhile, Candace Owens was doubling down again. She posted what she called her final evidence drop. This time, she released partially redacted screenshots showing payments labeled sponsorship engagement strategy between Kirk's Media LLC and a podcast intermediary company. She captioned it simply, "Connect the dots," and the dots connected themselves. Independent investigators on Twitter cross-referenced business records and found that one of the intermediary companies had ties to a producer from Rogan's inner circle. Within hours, Rogan's name was trending again, this time alongside ethics investigation and podcast pay-for-play. It was over. Whatever image Rogan had as the untouchable voice of truth was shattered. The empire he built on calling out mainstream hypocrisy was now drowning in the same kind of scandal he used to laugh at. In a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, Rogan's team released a press statement claiming misinterpretation and fabricated connections, but even that backfired. Fans posted side-by-side comparisons of Rogan's statement with political press releases, mocking him for sounding more scripted than a campaign apology. And then, just when the chaos couldn't get any louder, Candace Owens went live again. This time, she wasn't angry. She was calm, confident, almost smug. She looked into the camera and said, "The truth always hurts the loudest voices the most. Joe can recover, Charlie can repent, but the public? The public won't forget." It was the final nail. In the days that followed, Rogan quietly deleted old episodes featuring Charlie Kirk. Charlie vanished from social media entirely. Spotify replaced Rogan's homepage banner with something less controversial. And Candace? She walked away untouched, trending. And more powerful than ever, the empire of truth-tellers had collapsed under the weight of its own hypocrisy, and the internet watched every second of it with popcorn in hand. Because in the end, this wasn't just about Joe Rogan, Candace Owens, or Charlie Kirk. This was about the illusion of authenticity. About how even the voices screaming the loudest about truth can get lost in the noise of their own brand. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the internet, a new question began to echo: if Joe Rogan can fall, who's next? So, what do you think? Was Candace Owens really exposing corruption? Or was this a masterclass in public manipulation? Did Joe Rogan play innocent? Or play dumb? And if Charlie Kirk's empire was built on secrets, how many more are still hiding behind the podcast curtains? One thing's for sure, the truth always finds a microphone. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if you're still clutching your popcorn, and subscribe because this story is far from over. You're watching Lumi Legacy, where the drama never sleeps, and neither do we when the receipts start burning.